Okay, all right, folks. My name is Rafat Ali. I'm the CEO and founder of Skift. I'm sure we've encountered many of you in previous live broadcasts. I'm trying to share this on my Twitter feed. Um, and Today we're doing this after a while where we thought after the news, particularly this weekend, with the election results being clear, despite whatever anybody else wants to say. And the Monday morning news, particularly resonant in the travel industry, which is the news about the vaccine becoming the potential first vaccine candidate having much higher effectiveness than experts initially had assumed. 90% the Pfizer Biogen vaccine that potentially will be in the market, at least in the US, in the second half of 2021, which obviously from a travel industry's perspective is huge. This is what a lot of us and a lot of the industry is banking on, the vaccine and the recovery that will hopefully happen from there. And we wanted to gather our team that day in, day out talks to people in the travel industry, are experts at what they do, the Skift editorial and the research team that you see on here. I'm just going to go clockwise from my screen. Cam, who covers hospitality for us. Lily, who's into her week 2 of working with Skift. We're already putting her to work. Covers global tourism for us. And Seth Borko, who is our senior research analyst, covers, among many other things, economy and what that means for travel industry, online travel, Airbnb particularly, quite interesting, quite heavily these days for obvious reasons. And also airlines on and off as well. So those are some of the things that we will discuss. For many of you who follow Skift closely, I'm the one who comments on pretty much everything else, but I'm standing on the shoulders of all the work that our team does. So the past 10 months for the travel industry as well as the Skift team obviously has been interesting and challenging to say the least. And a lot of the work, incredible work that our team has been doing in the last 10 months, despite all the difficult circumstances, is just a wonder to see from somebody who leads the team. It's just incredible to see. So we're going to get into the discussion, but I want to mention that one of the things that we've changed over the last few months is we've launched Skift Pro, which is our daily news membership. If you go to skift.com/membership, for as little as 82 cents a day, you are able to read Skift, $1 per day if you do an annual, and less than that if you do not biannual.
It's less than a cup of coffee.
It really is actually not in not the corner street here in New York, but less than a cup of Starbucks coffee, yes, for sure. And then Skift Research, which is a little more expensive than that, but that's because of the work that they do and the incredible work that they do. So go to research.skift.com for that as well. I know many of you are subscribers to that. Okay, preamble done. Seth, I'll come to you first. This week has been an incredibly hopeful time for the travel industry. I would say the first time in a long time, obviously, all this year. Is the optimism, and so that's happening. The news is also that this is a very dark winter to come because all the second wave, particularly in US and Europe and other parts of the world as well, second or third wave, coming with a lot of ferocity. What is driving the optimism? Is the optimism warranted or misplaced?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great place to start. I think there's definitely reason for some optimism. I think it all starts with kind of like the economy. Another political slogan is the economy. It's stupid, right? And travel is such a large part of that. And they're just totally interplay with each other. You can't have travel without consumers that have money and want to spend it, without businesses that have confidence in future investment. You can't have travel without that. And then conversely, travel itself contributes a lot to the economy. And so what have we seen there? Well, I think we should look at travel specifically. So we've developed something called the Skift Recovery Index. We're very proud of it. It's a proprietary index. And it aggregates a lot of really interesting features. We have forward-looking indicators like search activity. We have real data, dollar around bookings, around volumes, airline seat capacity. And we're kind of blending it all together to get a holistic look at how the travel economy is doing. It includes some macroeconomic indicators in there as well. So right now in the U.S., our indicator is at 43. So what does that mean? It's relative to last year. So we're at 43% of the output that we saw this week last year in the U.S. So what does that tell us from a recovery perspective? Well, in April, the recovery index was at 15. So we're doing a lot better than we were in April, for sure. But we're hardly back there yet. And unfortunately, since about September, we've been coasting at kind of this like mid 40 level. So the recovery it was an initial sharp recovery. It's since stalled. And that's true. We're seeing that in a lot of places. That's not, so true, by the way, of maybe the broader U.S. economy, where overall unemployment is getting better. The unemployment numbers keep getting better and better and better. And meanwhile, overall unemployment in the U.S. is 7%, and in hotels it's 25%. So there's still a lot needed, and the hope is that that the extra gap to get us that second leg will be hopefully a vaccine. And will be hopefully more stimulus. That was a big political thing that had stalled out. That had been given a lot of the legs and really helping to kickstart that broader economic recovery with stimulus. That came in April, the CARES Act. It stalled and ahead of the presidential election. So there's hope that with a new administration, some new bills can be passed. Even if they're not travel specific, if they help consumers and businesses, that helps travel. And then hopefully, the new administration and new Congress can address the fact that travel needs more help than the broader economy.
And
so optimism.
And in terms of the vaccine, from your perspective, I mean, certainly none of us are experts at the science of it, but the 90% number is significant, which, from what we understand, at least by reading, means that it is 90% effectiveness in the people of preventing potential COVID, and that this is only one of the vaccines, and others, obviously, there are many others that are competing with it. And so in U.S., the hope is that it will start getting distributed second half of next year. I'm guessing it will start with, they've said that it's going to start with the first responders, the medical personnel, people that are going to offices. So I'm sure there's a lot of activity on the large companies that are trying to get a hold on this for the employees. And then it will come to the general public. So we're looking potentially really mass distribution in late 21, early 22 and beyond, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, these things are very tricky, and even though we saw really encouraging data, there's always more data readouts to come, other trials to come. So I'm definitely a glass half full kind of guy. I'm an optimist, but there's no guarantees.
Yeah,
I guess I understand where we are, where the hope is that we're on track for.
And let's go back a little bit to Skift research, the work that you have also done, which is the Skift Health Score in terms of the health of the companies, and we are tracking the top 100 public companies. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have 100 public companies in travel, and we're every quarter updating it with looking at their financial data, stock market data, fundamental data to see which companies do we think are in the best position in terms of being, literally the healthiest, strongest companies versus the weakest. And we have a top 10 list that we update. We find it's unsurprisingly some of the larger brands and franchises. We consistently put the OTAs, Book and Holdings, at the top spot.
And they're in the top spot because they have the cash reserves and historically have higher profit margins.
Yeah, it's both that they're a big company. They raised a lot of cash, so they're very well equipped to handle this downturn in their cash burn rates. It's also because they have pretty much all of their expenses are variable. It's pretty much all salaries and marketing. And so when there's no demand, they can just cut their marketing expense and they're kind of preserved
Sort
some
of
margin.
asset light model in that
It's the
sense.
asset light model on steroids, whereas an airline or even a hotel operator, still a hotel owner still has real assets with fixed costs. They need to pay the rent and the electricity or the gas bills for every flight or hotel or whatever, right? So it's just a lot easier for them to survive in this environment.
So speaking of the hotel industry, Cam, we'll come to you next. So hospitality, you've been covering. You joined Skift a month before, I think, or maybe even a week before our office shut down in March, and have been obviously thrown the fire from that perspective, covering the hospitality industry, which in many ways is better off than some other sectors in travel. You could argue there's some demand, particularly local, that is blowing up a lot of things, innovations that are staycations and et cetera, that you've covered quite a bit. You've also been covering quite heavily the owner investor perspective, which historically we hadn't covered as much, but because of your background and also because of our increasing interest in that part of the world. So in terms of hospitality, the 40% number that Skift Recovery Index is sort of at, is that what you're seeing, or obviously variable across different companies, and US is different than other countries? So what's your sense?
Yeah, it's funny. When I hear that number, it is pretty spot on to where occupancy is right now in the US hotel industry. I mean, it just eclipsed over 50% at Labor Day. That's kind of been viewed as sort of the high watermark for the industry. I think going forward, it's been back now around like 47, 48. It kind of like fluctuates there, but it's pretty much plateaued. And I think there's been general momentum of like that's going to be where it is until we can get back corporate travel, events, the bigger stuff that kind of keeps your 800 room plus Marriott's or Omnis in business. What's interesting is the hotel industry has been a little shy to address what's happening right now with rising case counts in the US. We're just coming off third quarter earnings, and Hyatt CEO is really the only one I heard who was blatantly like, this is going to be a problem for us through the end of the year. And we need to really just expect, even though none of them are issuing forward guidance right now because of just all the uncertainty. He's the one who said like the fourth quarter is going to be pretty brutal. And so I think we're going to see a little bit of retrenchment in how the recovery has gone so far.
And I know you speak to a lot of owners and investors as well. A lot of these Marriotts and others have done very heavy cuts in their corporate staff. The corporate staff is a fraction really of what it used to be. So the sentiment from an investor / owner perspective, as you're speaking to these, what do you think? It looks like many of them are they evaluating these relationships more closely than they have in the past?
Definitely. I mean, like right now you have sort of this sparring of, is bigger really better? And if you talk to the Marriotts and Hiltons of the world, they say yes. What else are they going to say? And that they expect to see growth through this because they're going to convince your independent hotel owner that taking a Marriott flag and putting it on your mom and pop inn is the best way forward to build a customer base and market share coming out of this. But that hasn't materialized yet. It's actually what you've seen is the story we've been covering kind of the most is this Boston real estate firm has actually deflagged or plans to deflag about 200 hotels affiliated with Marriott and IHG, saying that they perform better with a smaller brand called Sonesta. And I keep seeing a lot of murmurs of independent hotel companies trying to link up where they don't actually merge because no one has the money to do that right now. And that, it's enough to satisfy lenders if they have to go through special servicing or something like that to show like, here's our business model forward. But without having to throw some of the revenue that they earn to one of these bigger brands. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot of holes in this theory that big brand affiliation is going to be the trump card coming out of this.
And the brands that we follow closely, Marriott and all the big ones, there was a sense that, or at least was some sense that they would shed some of the sub brands that they have. Hasn't officially, I suppose, happened yet, even if they're putting some of the brands in hibernation. Maybe doing less effort on that, more effort on that.
That's just it. I mean, it's kind of maybe hibernation, but if you have an owner who is happy with his brand affiliation and the check clears, I think why retire it? And so, I mean, we had Accor's Sebastian Bazin in Ronnie's fantastic interview where he said, we have all these brands, but what was it? Something like 10 account for 90% of the revenue. Mm-hmm. So, but he also said, we're not going to get rid of the remaining, 24, just because there's such identity. People love them, even if there's only 2 of them in the world. I mean, Howard Johnson, for instance, is a brand that's been around forever. I never would have thought that's going to be some growth. And what do we see? They're adding a bunch of Howard Johnsons in India right now because it's a strong brand. So I think it's just kind of, if they haven't gone away during the Great Recession, if they haven't gone away this year, I don't think brand bloat is ever going to be a problem that goes away.
Yeah, interesting. It's probably a case of like a problem that doesn't exist, but everybody hopes is there for some reason. I mean, I guess from us, like, we should focus on this. Like the natural instinct of business is you should focus on things. But I suppose if it works, why? And the overheads aren't that many really. Yeah. So. Lily, so you've obviously been covering tourism prior to Skift. Obviously, been writing about it. Have done freelance work for us before, obviously coming on full time as well. One of the big questions that everybody has, USA's brand, has been hugely affected, not just in the last 4 years, but sort of has been but for a lot of, not just because of the political leadership, but for all reasons, has obviously taken a hit over the last 4 years, 5 years, and maybe more. From your perspective, as you're thinking about and you're covering and speaking to people in the industry, the inbound, when it opens up, because right now it's not really open in a sort of the rest of the world is not open either. How are you thinking through, and how is the industry thinking through the damage that Brand USA or USA's brand? I keep saying Brand USA because Brand USA is an actual marketing organization that markets US, but USA's brand. How much of damage do you think it has gone through?
I think that there's definitely a flicker of optimism, probably the biggest one we've had so far. And as you said, I mean, it's been a really difficult 4 years or more for the US on the tourism end. And I remember even 4 years ago when tourism tanked immediately as soon as the election results were announced. And so I think that we're really... the US has a chance to turn this around. I mean, image is everything. As you know, marketing a destination is difficult when you have a leadership that is anti-immigrant, anti-female, anti-Black, anti-gay. I mean, where do we start? So I think that there's a chance here to start working on rebuilding that image now. And it's never too early. We have, I mean, just having a vice president who was a female, for the first time, and is of Caribbean and Black descent and Indian descent is just phenomenal. So it's kind of like reminding people of what the US really stood for in the past. And I've heard comments, I mean, even on Saturday when it was, the results were coming in and folks were saying, I can't wait to go back to the US again. That's pretty amazing. And so, lots of chance to see that change. And then, it's expected, it's been predicted that under Biden, immediately within the first 100 days, he's going to lift some of the bans, against numerous countries. I mean, it had started with a Muslim ban, but it had expanded quietly to include other countries.
Huge,
so I think that's,
in terms of
Africa,
borders reopening, is there... is the industry writing off 2021 in terms of international borders being open in a wide sense beyond sort of these corridors between Singapore and Hong Kong, etc. That those types of arrangements.
I'm skeptical in the corridors. I think that the priorities are going to be really getting a handle on this virus. Obviously, we don't know if a vaccine is really going to turn out to be effective within the next 6 months or not. But I think that for there to truly be an increase in travel, they would have to work on a more unified system to get people traveling again.
Oh, yeah.
But first get the virus under control. And I think that's really the challenge right now. But having a leadership that's going to prioritize that is
I think the biggest
pretty big for tourism.
Thing that is, and everybody's talked about this, the unified response is the biggest missing piece globally, not just in travel, but like world in everything.
Yes, globally and regionally. Yes, sorry. Globally and also regionally, you're seeing it even within regions. It's just this lack of unity in terms of how to handle the testings and the quarantines and all of that. And I think that once that's sort of resolved, or at least closer to being resolved, then
economies that are hugely dependent on tourism. You live in one, in fact, DR, and so Caribbean, which is a region that you know very well, you've covered a lot as well historically, and now, you did a big piece on the future of Caribbean tourism for Skift recently as well. What's the state and what's the hope?
Well, the Caribbean is, as you know, the most dependent region in the whole world on tourism. So they've really had to kick off their industry sooner than everybody else. I think it started in June. And so it's been this tough balance between, the public health versus getting the economies going again. And I think that because of that, they're more at risk than other countries. In terms of the new administration, I think it's good news for the Caribbean, but at the same time, there are those that say that it won't be much change because I don't know if you know, I don't know if most people know this, but China has been a increasingly major partner for the Caribbean in terms of economic development, infrastructure, and so on. So even tourism, and so. On the economic side, it might not be such a massive difference, but at the same time, on the source market side, it is because the number one source of tourists for the Caribbean is the U.S. So as long as the U.S. is not under control as far as the pandemic, then
let me ask a follow-up question.
Going to delay the Caribbean fully recovering.
The state of cruise tourism in the Caribbean and potentially a chance to reinvent. Cruise has been a huge industry for the Caribbean historically, and leading up to this, obviously completely closed. In fact, somebody put a question: what is the coronavirus incident on the Sea Dream? This is the first cruise in the Caribbean islands that restarted last week and already has a positive incident. Unfortunately, your sense on cruise tourism?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to disappear totally. I do think that the smaller ships were a good idea. I just think that the cruise industry needs to slow down, and there's a rush to sort of get back to business. And as we see, it's not going to be. It's just going to be worse. They've already got 6 cases on that first ship that sailed out of Barbados, including journalists. Yeah, including journalists on that ship. So. I think that the future for cruise tourism is not looking great. I think that they're probably going to be the last to truly fully recover. And the more they rush it, the more damaging it is going to be to that industry. So unfortunately, the Caribbean will be forced to boost their overnight tourism and just get really creative. Which long term is better for them, because I think one of the challenges of Caribbean tourism is
to attract new visitors that have a sense of Caribbean, even though that may or may not be reality. they need to reinvent their brands in so many ways. One other sector that's hit as almost as bad, Seth, I'm going to come to you in a second, is the tour operator sector. This is the group tour business that is 100% shut, as similar to cruises. Until recently, there's some domestic demand, and the amazing part about the tour operator industry, this is the multi-day package tours, is that it's all small businesses that roll up into larger businesses, and unfortunately have been hurt the most. Seth, you were making a point. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to kind of segue on Lily's point about cruise, and when that comes back, I think it plays into the different potentials of the vaccine, right? I think the vaccine, just an earlier point, is that the vaccine can have a couple of different benefits, right? In terms of it can jumpstart travel before everyone is fully vaccinated, and then once hopefully it's effective and safe and everyone is fully vaccinated, well then certainly at that point the cruise industry could recover. But I think there's this interesting thing I've been thinking about, which is this concept of there's some studies done after 9/11 about what it takes to get people traveling again. And one is income, it's the economy. But they also talk about it's your perception of risk and also the society's perception of risk and the public's perception of risk, which is kind of like the call your mom factor. And when you tell your mom you're taking a flight and she gets very upset, there goes that trip, even if you felt personally comfortable. Or we have a travel tracker survey that surveys Americans about their travel habits, and increasingly visiting friends and family is like the number one type of travel. It's coming up with Thanksgiving, it's coming with December. Maybe I feel personally fine, but I don't want to fly and then go see my older parents, right? But if just they have a vaccine and I don't, that trip can still happen even though we're not fully vaccinated. So on the one hand, with a vaccine, maybe you can start to have more hotels and flight stays, but then there's a certain limit when you hit like really big events where everyone needs to be vaccinated. You're going to be in close, confined spaces. And maybe that's where in the cruise industry, perhaps even the events industry, run up against those limits.
Right. And I think I think that affects its image, too. I mean, it's a brand image. It's you don't want to be in that situation where you're splattered over the front page again because
totally.
I guess
you took a risk.
I think like for the hotel side, the news from a vaccine, what that does, I think immediately is you keep hearing how the events business is pretty robust. If you look at the second half of 2021, I think the positive news from Pfizer, maybe that locks in those dates a little bit more than hotel owners had felt they would a week ago or 2 weeks ago. That said, I am a little curious if this news is going to do much over the next 3 months, because I mean, we're hovering around 150,000 new cases a day in the U.S. And I don't think, even if there is something down the horizon with more than 90% efficacy, how many people are going to be like, okay, let's keep traveling in full force over the holidays?
My thought on that is that unless we're comfortable in our local lives, it's going to be very hard for travel to come back. Like, to your point, Seth, on the research, which is, am I comfortable with my kid going to school first? Like, that's the first barrier, or the biggest barrier in my life today, and all of our lives. Our immediate family members safe going to do immediate things. And I think if that is settled, then we go out one concentric circle outside, then another concentric circle outside. That's why local tourism is having a boom in terms of like, I can go in my bubble, in my car, to a place, and that sort of the one. From an airline perspective, Seth, since you look very deeply at the airline sector as well, I guess somewhat similar dynamics to hotels, which is there is some amount of demand. The numbers from TSA and US are increasing. They've sort of plateaued potentially at this point. The airlines are very well capitalized. The surprise is that none have gone bankrupt yet. At least the big ones in the US have not gone bankrupt. Maybe not surprising.
Well, they got a huge government bailout, effectively, right? Which is why they haven't gone bankrupt yet. Otherwise, they would. The airlines are in a very tricky spot, because their demand is normalizing somewhat. I think their biggest challenge right now is convincing people to dip their toes in the water and take the first flight. And we heard, I think it was from Southwest, they told us
Chief Commercial Officer, correct?
Yeah, propensity to travel from their Chief Commercial Officer that it's like 50-point increases in propensity to travel once you take your first flight. So repeat travel is a big deal. And the other bit is how, it's all about how safe people are going to feel. I see a question in the chat about rapid testing at airports, hotels. So that's a big thing too. That is only real, at least in the U.S., only just now getting rolled out. We were talking with the edit team, the editorial team last night about the past CDC screening efficacy. They screened the way they did it initially when it first started, and this does speak somewhat to the administration. They screened like 750,000 passengers for COVID. The way they did it was temperature checks and survey forms, like have you been around someone with COVID or do you feel ill? Do you know how many people out of the almost 700, I think I'm reading this right, 700,000 people, how many people reported they'd been in contact with someone in COVID in the last 2 weeks? It was 4. Some insanely small number, just to show you how ineffective those checks were. So the rapid testing is definitely a step up. It certainly is more effective than that. Whether it's truly effective, as with the cruises, we're seeing it's not 100% effective, but it makes people feel better. It helps people get into the airport, and then once they take their first flight, they're more likely to take their next flight. And you pair that with some form of vaccine distribution, I can start to see a slightly, somewhat optimistic scenario for airlines, but it's tough. And it also, let me just make one more point. It very much matters on your market. The best performing airline in the U.S. this quarter was Allegiant, because low cost structure, low fares, all leisure travel, very nimble, point to point with our routes. Worst performing was Hawaiian, because it's almost entirely international travel, because Hawaii, again, right or wrong, whether they're protecting the local community, we can debate that certainly, but they had very strict quarantine requirements. You couldn't drive to that market. Huge trans-Pacific business coming from Asia to Hawaii. So Hawaiian's just doing terrible. So it's going to very much depend on your market too, business versus leisure, international versus domestic.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Some of the earnings on the airline earnings. So this is obviously earnings season, as we talked about. I think it was maybe United and others that are, everybody's shifting their capacity from the business routes to the leisure routes. And obviously JetBlue and others are trying to capitalize because they were once obviously always ahead of that. VFR is a term that unfortunately doesn't get talked about much, is not being talked about, visiting friends and relatives market, which the industry doesn't like as much because there's people maybe staying with their family. So the hotel industry doesn't get the revenues. Maybe they're spending less on food because obviously they're eating with their friends and family. But the reality is it's what's keeping the industry afloat in many ways, in many parts of the world.
Our survey work indicates that. Oh, sorry.
Yep. Especially sorry. I was going to say, Rafa, that I agree. Let's not discount the diaspora.
And I think
huge.
JetBlue has actually said that their traffic to Caribbean is decent because of the back and forth potentially as well. Cam, from a hospitality perspective, we've seen a lot of at least start of innovations on things like, come and stay at our hotel, staycation type stuff, whether obviously taking a staycation or working from the hotel. A couple of the operators that I spoke to recently said that it's actually turning into a real business, at least in New York for the locals. Obviously, the mileage will vary from place to place. It probably requires denser cities for it to work. From your perspective, these innovations that are coming in, and then we haven't even talked about business travel yet. We did talk a little bit about events, but from your perspective, what's real, what's not there?
So, the biggest innovation that you're seeing come out of this space is this work from hotel concept. That it's supposed to be a bridge between, your company's not letting you back into the office. You're tired of working from home because the dog's barking, your child's coming to play during a Zoom meeting. And so they're offering a day use program. Marriott's offering like a multi-day platform even, and pretty much all the companies now are doing this. there's some legs there. I think their biggest hurdle is how do you market this? Because I think a lot of people are looking at this, scratching their head and saying, how is this any different than just booking a room at a hotel and you asking to use their business center? You have seen some pretty interesting pairings so far. Industrious, which is an actual co-working provider, partnered with this smaller California brand, Proper Hospitality, where they're actually going retrofitting the space to make it actually conducive for working there during the day. It's not just using the desk in a hotel room. They have kind of the amenities, the snacks, the coffee, et cetera, that you expect from a WeWork or an industrial space in these hotels. And I've talked to some old sources of mine who are actually in the commercial real estate, like office space, and they think, is it going to be enough to keep Marriott like at the same level of business travel as they did before, except they're just staying during the day instead of overnight? No, but it is something that could have a pretty niche audience going forward, even after the pandemic, because if you do have more companies cutting back the amount of space that they need at an office, but they're willing to foot the bill at this, because a lot of these aren't that, perfectly honest. I mean, a Mandarin Oriental day use pass is still $350 here in Boston. I mean, I was looking at some of the Marriott ones. They're still $250, $400. I mean, it's you're still going to need a company to sort of subsidize that. And I think that it could be there. Real quick, too, I did want to go back to this audience question that Seth was answering. I think rapid testing is going to be the game changer for the hotel industry, but it's not so much the roadside Holiday Inn. They're doing fine. Drive to leisure travel, great.
Why are
it's
they
going to be
fine?
Because there is more of a sense that you can control your stay there. They're affordable at a time where, even though all the data shows people are actually saving money through this, they're not maybe necessarily willing to shell out quite yet, because again, there's still so much uncertainty of
course,
are we going to be a W
and jobs and everything is lost. Like, there's real pain all around.
Exactly. So people are still wanting to get out there, but why not do it at a Wyndham or a Choice Hotel or something a little bit more affordable rather than flying to a resort?
They're all likely to capture the essential business traveler.
Precisely.
Construction or healthcare who need or that's seen with extended stay, a low cost place to stay for work travel. That still happens.
Exactly. But where this rapid testing, I think, brings back is Las Vegas. I mean, and especially the midweek business in Las Vegas, because there's all this question of, sure, we have this good news about a vaccine. How many people are actually really going to take it? I don't think you're going to be able to have a consumer electronics show at its former glory until you have something like rapid testing, where if you can get people in there at the same level, but safely say, hey, everyone is negative. That's how you get it back. And I think that brings back a lot of these 1,000+ room hotels in Vegas on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And markets.
Seth, let's talk about the thing that we've been expecting for a long time, the Airbnb IPO. Let's talk about short-term rentals have been going through a boom this year. Initially, the conventional wisdom was, well, they're done for because nobody wants to stay in other people's homes. The secret that, not so secret, everybody was that there weren't other people's homes. These were professionally managed levels of professionally managed vacation rental industry is what it is at this point. And so they've gone through a boom. In fact, I would argue at this point, Airbnb prices I have seen are the highest I've ever seen on Airbnb. It's not just me saying it. This is what data is also telling you. And then obviously the other players, VRBO, which was having a tough time, owned by Expedia, is actually doing very well right now. Good for them on that front. Booking.com, I'm sure, is seeing a similar rise for their integrated product as well. Airbnb IPO S1 potentially is dropping, from what we understand, next week.
Yeah. We don't have hopefully next week. That's what we've heard. It's an exciting time for a short-term rental. I mean, it's been a growing space, and it's definitely no longer, it is a sub-industry, but it's really its own industry now with its own niches, which I think is very important to understand when we break this down, because there's been short-term rentals in urban markets, in apartment buildings. There's a whole master lease model of Sonder and Lyric. There's been professionally managed whole homes in vacation destinations. There's been what Airbnb started with, which is the shared bedroom. And each of those sub-markets, of itself a sub-market, are performing very differently. The shared apartment space that Airbnb is known for, to your point, Profit, people don't want to stay in a stranger's home on their couch right now. But and there's also been a decline in travel to urban cities, partly because that's where initially some of the bigger outbreaks were, and also because a lot of the cultural amenities are closed or were closed, museums and stuff like that. So what happened was the short-term rental market has been doing great, but it's been these professionally managed vacation market destination, drive-to destination markets in, the South or the beach or the mountains that have been doing incredibly well. Some of them seeing their best years ever in history, as opposed to, well, the rest of the travel industry is struggling. They're up year over year. And by the way, you're spot on about some of the data points in terms of Vrbo, which is Expedia subsidiary. They saw their Expedia as a whole, the whole Expedia group saw the revenue per room that it earns increase not because they were selling more stuff, but because they were selling more rooms via Vrbo, and those are more expensive rooms, and they were earning higher commissions from higher length of stays and higher daily rates. And so even though the room nights sold went down, the revenue per room went up, and that was almost entirely because it shifted from selling hotels to selling those full home, long-term stay vacation rentals. So that's really been the sweet spot. There's a ton of professionalization that's happening there, and I think will continue to happen. So it's an exciting time for Airbnb to go public, because I can't wait to get my hands on it, because they have a little bit of everything. They're not, I said that's where they start, in that shared bedroom, but they have plenty of full homes. They're a major distribution platform. They're in China. They have a big business. They also have an experience business, tour operators. So when we get our hold on that filing, we're going to be able to dig into it and really get an even better sense than we have now about how that market has been reacting. Hotels are regaining some of their strength, though. I will end on a somewhat sober, and not sober, but a downbeat, I guess, for this. That in Q3, what Booking and Expedia saw was that huge mix shift to vacation rentals in Q2. Still a big shift in Q3, but less than what they saw in Q2. People are trying hotels out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, again, it's more time has passed, so people have more adjusting. Human behavior is adjusting. Let me ask you this question, and we're wrapping up. I have one more question. I saw one more question, but in terms of this debate on sort of cities and the future of cities, and people not wanting to go to cities, at least for a while to come, versus more remote destinations, and potentially benefiting, obviously, some of the islands when air routes reopen, etc. New York City, where I'm here, Seth is here as well. What's the future of New York City and city tourism? Cam, you're obviously in Boston, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I was about to comment on Seth's mention of the cities and how people are exiting, and I think cities are going to come back stronger out of this, and we're seeing it already. There are cities like I was just looking at this last week, Paris, London, that are completely shifting their priorities, in terms of improving transportation methods, taking off parking spaces and turning those into pedestrian areas for cyclists as well, more green. And so they're just becoming sort of more technologically savvy too. I mean, they're using tech platforms to determine where it's congested, change that, and just reconfigure the standard of living and the quality of living. So even places like Milan, I saw, even Addis Ababa in Ethiopia is completely greening and building a whole bunch of new parks in the downtime, like when there's nobody around. So I think that it's looking very promising for cities, even though it's a difficult time. But when we come out on the other end of it, and we will,
certainly we haven't seen
it's going to be a major boom for cities.
Well, the opposite is happening. A real estate boom is happening in house buying. How do we sort of wrap our heads around that?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I think a lot of that boom is happening in suburbs outside the cities, right? It's people you know, finally saying this is the time to have a little bit of backyard. That would be a nice thing to have right now. You know, less impact. It's going to depend. I mean, certainly as far as the short-term rental market goes, by the time I can do it, I mean, people more home ownership or even second home ownership, which actually there is some of that happening, creates more inventory for the short-term rental market. And part of that, by the way, is driven by interest rates, which are low and will remain low for a very long time. That encourages buying. But there's a lot more to the real estate market than just the home stuff. You've got the office space, you've got residential and apartments. It's very much in flux. The future of travel is very much tied in with the future of real estate. You know, more homes is more inventory for short-term rentals. Empty residential buildings could lead to further rise in again, urban short-term rentals and maybe a resurgence of master lease. Commercial space is going to be intimately tied up with working remotely and digital nomad kind of stuff. So it's hard to. You've asked me a huge question. I don't know if I have a precise, quick answer to end on.
Our job is one of the things that I say a lot is our job is to ask the hard and the foolish questions, because if we don't ask, who's going to ask? So it's a big part of our job. One of the things. Oh, looks like Seth got dropped off. Seth, you're coming in and out.
Yeah,
you're good now. You're good now. One of the things that people confuse our role is like, oh, we should be less harsh on the travel industry. Well, our job is to be neither. Our job is to be a chronicler of what's happening, and tell your sister to stop calling you. I'm joking. I'm kidding. Our job is to ask the hard questions and tell as it is. Like, we're the realists in many ways, and skeptics, not cynics, skeptics in general. That's our role. So it's a push and pull that we have to explain to a lot of people. It's like, why are we beating an industry while down? No, we're not. We're going to ask the hard questions, because who's going to ask the hard questions? Last question. Let's see. What do you think of the global testing would look like? Who would coordinate this? Oh my God, if we can solve this, we would solve everything in the world. Some countries have guidelines for travel entry, some airports have programs. This is the biggest thing.
I think it's more sort of standardized procedures. You know, it's not a single universal testing, but even before a vaccine comes along, it's having a, you know, if I'm going to say, you know, England, or I'm going to Italy, or I'm going somewhere else, I mean, there has to be some sort of standardized procedure that I know what I'm expected to do, and I don't have to look up 10 gazillion rules. And
there have been some efforts.
Really
the one was a common pass, is that what it's called? The one that Matt has been Matt, who covered business travel for us, has been writing about, is this common pass effort that's very well funded from what we understand. And I think Amex and others have adopted it, which is a sort of a common testing. It's a digital passport. It's a word that people have been talking about for all of this year, which is on my phone. I have a thing which says I've been tested, and this was the last time I was tested, and you can scan and go on flight and standardized. I mean, that's to your point, really, on standardization of common standards across this, which unfortunately, like, if our passport authorities around the world somehow got hold of managing this, it feels like it could be done. But to your point, if we haven't been able to manage the disease itself in our localities, traveling, which is a much lower order thing, unfortunately, today, is going to take a long time.
Yeah. To your point about being maybe a skeptic, but not a cynic, but it'd be ideal. It'd be ideal to have a single global digital passport, but I'm a bit skeptical.
Yeah, well, the good news is that optimism is back. So at least at minimum, we're going to take that as a start. And we'll go from there. The 40% number that I've also been saying, if the industry can figure out a way to survive in that 40 to 60% demand/revenue, not demand, revenue, obviously we'll have to cut, unfortunately, the jobs that have been lost. The pain that his industry has gone through is just incredible. And if we can hold on for another 2021, the chances are that the pent up demand that we have seen, the need for people to travel, the more meaningful ways of people traveling, the green shoots, the innovation that's coming there, that is happening. There is a lot of innovation in times like these. You just have to know where to look, from all parts of the industry, and even players on the edge, which is amazing to see. And so, from our perspective, stay tuned to Skift, because this is what we do for a living, which is to latch not only ask the hard questions, but also keep an eye on the innovations that are happening that maybe in the edges and then come to the mainstream, hopefully because of us writing it. And we'll be back soon. I don't think the Twitter live stream worked, but unfortunately, but we'll figure it out the next time. Thank you, folks, for listening.
Oh, well.